Well, here he is. Ted O'Brien is the Shadow Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Welcome to the programme.
Thanks very much, Sarah.
So how many nuclear power stations would the Coalition build, and how long would it take to build them?
So the advice we've received from the best experts in the world is that small modular reactors could be constructed between about 3 to 5 years, large reactors 6 to 12 years.
I'm just going to stop you. I'm just going to. I know it's jumping in very quickly, but forgive me because
that's okay.
We've spoken to a lot of experts, and there's a lot of expertise on the table from the CSIRO over a number of years, and other groups. The timetable for getting a nuclear reactor up and running in the rest of the world in a comparable economy is a lot more than the time frame that you're describing. In the United States, it's 19 years on average. So how does Australia, with no supporting laws, no regulations, no workforce, no experience, no waste plans, no social licence, do it in under 10 years?
So let me unpack this. Firstly, just to finish my earlier response. Construction, 3 to 5 SMRs.
And that's small modular reactors.
3 to 5 years for small modular reactors. 6 to 12 years for large reactors. And as I was about to say, that is the advice of ANSTO. That is the advice of the Albanese government's nuclear agency.
Not from a standing start. So let's
construction, right? So before construction, you're right. You do need to stand up a regulator and so forth.
I'm just going to ask you a question now.
Can I answer that question?
Let me just say this one thing, because I think this is very important for the audience. And forgive me for interrupting there, but this is important. This is a complex subject. It's an extremely serious subject, given the nature of our commitments to reduce our emissions. Being straightforward about the detail and not trying to snow people seems to be incredibly important. So why would you start off by saying, not here, but out there in making public statements that you can do it in under 10 years when you know you can't?
That's not true, Sarah, with all due respect. I take your point and I actually agree with it. You have to be straightforward, you have to be completely transparent, and this is serious. And so, as your prelude showed, my counterpart, the Minister, cracking great one-liners about SAOs and telling me he's dreaming. One-liners is not the way you run Australia's energy system. Right now, we are in a mess because we have somebody with one-liners trying to run the system.
To be fair to him, he was talking about a whole series of things. That was the thing that he says at the end.
That was specific to nuclear, Sarah.
Right.
And this is the issue, because we have a government right now who is refusing to have a mature debate.
All right, let's have it.
But let me make this point.
Yeah.
Australians right now are paying among the highest energy prices in the world. We already have blackouts, it's getting worse, and our renewables target is failing.
I have brought you in here to talk about nuclear energy, so let's not waste time talking about the government for the moment. No, I'm going to stop you there, because I want to talk about...
I will now shift to nuclear, but to make the point, that is the problem we need to solve.
Yes.
In comes zero emissions nuclear energy. Not as a silver bullet, but as part... Can I just finish my sentence? As part of a balanced energy mix. And this is key.
Yes.
Working together with renewables, working together with gas.
Not a silver bullet. But let's talk about the facts. So a very optimistic timetable could potentially see one large-scale nuclear reactor, and we'll come to the smaller reactors in a moment. But in terms of the large-scale nuclear reactors, because that's what the opposition leader Peter Dutton's been talking about, an optimistic timetable could see one of them potentially up and running in the mid-2040s. So is it your policy to keep coal-fired generators running longer?
So if you allow me now to unpack, right? So you're right, you need a regulator stood up and you need a whole bunch of things done. Now, if you look at the way this is done internationally and best practice, the advice we have, which aligns with the Australian government's advice, which is the point I was making earlier, ANSTO, is that you actually can, if it's a small modular reactor, work within a decade, a 10-year
period. I think
period.
We're talking about the large-scale reactors.
And I'm getting to that.
Yeah.
And large-scale reactors will take a handful of years after that. Again, subject to the design and the planning. Now, if you look at the most recent entrant in the civil nuclear program globally, it's the UAE. And they hosted COP.
To be clear to the audience, just let's make it clear to the audience, we're talking about a country that is partially a command economy. So it's not a country like Australia. It's not a country where people can object to a nuclear reactor in their constituency. So just to be clear, UAE is not comparable to Australia. So it can set up its regulatory framework. And in the UAE, even there, even in an autocracy, it took 4 years. So I want to come back to the question I asked you.
And can I finish my point, though? Because you just interrupted me, Sarah, on my point, and you finished a different point on the same subject.
I think you hadn't answered the first question.
So the UAE,
yes,
they are the most recent entrant.
Indeed.
Right? Now, when you look at the inclusion of COVID, that apparently took them out for 2 years, they went from a decision to actually having nuclear on the grid within a 10-year period. These weren't small modular reactors which happen faster, right? Yes. These are the larger plants, the 1.4 gigawatt plants. They were bringing on a new reactor around about one every 12 months. Now, you might say that
yes,
a very different system of government, and I agree with that, but I have visited the plant. I have spoken with the people who have implemented it. They actually moved the site from their original site to a secondary site. Why? Because of community pushback, right? It's not like they steamroll over a community.
Well, not at the same level.
Not a democracy, but I'm happy to talk about democracies too.
My question was, if in terms of a large-scale nuclear reactor, and we're still parking the small ones, because as you well know, the economics of small modular reactors have suffered tremendous setbacks in recent years, including the recent collapse of one of the most promising ones.
We are looking at SMRs and large, to be very clear, and I disagree with that point, but we can come back to it if you like.
Let's just come back to that question. So if you could get one nuclear reactor up in 2040, and that's not a given in the timeframes that we've seen around the world, bearing in mind the United States, 19 years with a fully fledged industry already in existence.
The Australian Government's agency disagrees with you, and multiple other experts around the world disagree.
This is the question.
Anthony Albanese agrees
this is the question.
So does Chris Bowen.
Is it your policy, with uncertainty, at least we can agree that there is no certainty over the operational date of a large-scale nuclear reactor being built in a country with no existing nuclear reactor business in its landscape? The question was, is it your policy to keep coal-fired power stations running longer?
Yeah. So our view is we should not be closing our coal-fired power stations prematurely. Now, the reason I say that is, as of today, we are looking at 90% of our baseload energy exiting the grid by 2034. So we're talking within a decade, 90% of our baseload energy gone because of Labor's policy settings. Now, Sarah, the lights will go out.
But hang on, are you saying...
The lights will go out if that happens.
It is going to be coalition policy that you will keep those coal-fired power stations running longer than the dates that have been set in train now?
No, they're your words.
They're the decisions taken by the companies and the organisations that run those power stations, and they've set dates for them.
Let me clarify if I can. Is that all right?
Yes, of course.
Okay, thank you. So our position is you shouldn't be closing those coal-fired power stations prematurely. As for policies that we'll announce them in due course. I'm not doing that this evening. But so much as Labor like to say, we're closing coal, in truth, Sarah, I believe their policy, the way it's going to pave out, is renewables plus coal. And we know that why? Because the Victorian Labor government has done 2 deals behind closed doors, no transparency of those deals, to keep coal in the system. Same as WA,
right,
and you wait till New South Wales Labor. New South Wales Labor on the Araring coal-fired power station, they're negotiating. So that's what Labor's doing right now. Chris Bowen and Anthony Albanese don't even want to talk about it. That's the truth, because their renewables plan is failing.
Let's come back to what you're doing, because I've asked you a couple of times what your view is on the future mix. I want to talk about this. Both you and the opposition leader, Peter Dutton, have quoted Bill Gates in support of a new nuclear policy. As we know, Bill Gates, one of the world's most successful businessmen, and someone who invests in new nuclear technology. Yes. So you've both spruiked him as an example of among many, but a significant one, you'd agree. So I asked Bill Gates on this programme whether Australia should get involved in nuclear energy, and this was his answer. Australia doesn't need to get engaged on this. Australia should aggressively take advantage of Australia's natural endowment to do solar and wind. That's clear-cut and beneficial to Australia. So does the coalition think it understands the business of nuclear energy better than Bill Gates?
The best experts in the world have told us that Australia needs nuclear in order to get to net zero.
You're the ones quoting Bill Gates, and Bill Gates
fine.
says
well, let me talk about Bill Gates.
Idea for Australia.
Here's what I love about Bill Gates, right? In the state of Wyoming in the United States, the Northern Power Plant is actually transitioning from being a coal plant to a nuclear plant. Now, they are able to do so by moving the unionised labour workforce over into the nuclear plant with higher wages, and that community was one of 4 that vied to host that plant. That is Bill Gates' plant.
I'm aware.
That part,
so Bill Gates,
I think that
a
is
successful investor in nuclear energy, says makes no sense for Australia in this moment to invest in nuclear energy when it has an abundance of solar and wind. So to come back to my question,
as an investor, that is his right. I'm not going to question what he wishes to do with his money.
He's criticising he is saying it is not a good decision, it's not a wise decision for Australia to invest in nuclear energy at this stage. Wait 10 to 15 years, see whether these highly experimental new plants work, and then decide whether it should be in the mix. But right now, what does he say? Stay with what Australia has in abundance, solar and wind. That is Bill Gates' advice. Will you listen to it?
I will listen to the underlying principle, and I agree with the underlying principle, because what I hear there is you've got to leverage your comparative advantages. Do we have a comparative advantage of wind and sunshine? Yeah, we do. Therefore, are renewables important to our future grid? Absolutely. But I tell you what, we also have a comparative advantage in. We are blessed with abundant resources. We have the world's largest reserves of uranium, the fuel that powers nuclear power plants the world over, yet none of our own. And we also have enormous amounts of gas. So we have to leverage our comparative advantage and get the mix right.
Let me just ask you this quickly, because we do have to wrap up. But just on the question of 2 questions on the question of cost. So, as we know, at the moment, nuclear is still the most expensive new build electricity generation in the world, particularly compared to renewables. Why choose the most expensive
if you're an investor
technology when we have access to the cheapest?
If you are an investor, I'm sure it is more expensive for the capex. But what counts, Sarah, is not the developer or the investor. It is the consumer. And this is where Labor gets it wrong. You put the consumer at the centre.
You're making an argument that says that it's not attractive for investors. That means that
I didn't make that argument. Well, I said it's a higher capex, higher capital expense.
Yes.
Didn't say it's unattractive.
So you're not going to have to fill the gap
a higher capex
with subsidies.
But my point was this: in Canada, in Ontario, what drives down prices for consumers who pay half the price that we do in Australia? Nuclear. When I sat down with the Japanese,
$1 billion worth of subsidies in Ontario.
Well, hang on. If you look at why, because Chris Bowen said that on television. Because I tell you what, the research of that paves out very differently. The Australian government also provides some relief. If you look at the relief that's provided, it's actually due to contracts signed with renewables. The Japanese. Yep. I've sat down, I've met with the departments there, I've seen the figures. Nuclear gets prices down. Canada, nuclear gets prices down. United States, nuclear gets prices down. UK, nuclear gets prices down. But here we are in Australia, and we have the Australian Labor Party, that's not been interested in this debate, suddenly now becoming experts in disagreeing with their own agency.
Just before we close, I'm just going to have to make a point about the United Kingdom, because you are ignoring the fact that the current nuclear programme in the United Kingdom is in terrible trouble with the French nuclear programme at Hinkley going over cost. So I'm going to finish there. We have to wrap it up, but we've clearly got a lot more to talk about.
And we can talk about the UAE next time, on budget, and within just over a decade. How good's that?
And an autocracy.